Good evening, everyone in the room and also online. We're here all today to try and refocus the narrative on electric vehicles back to the long-term opportunities that we do believe lie ahead for Europe over the next 15 years, looking at the headwinds we face today and powering the shift through them. We've had a summer of bad news in this discussion. We've had apparent sales slowdowns. We've had investments cancelled in the battery supply chain. And we've had news or threats of job losses from some of our automotive titans. This has been very much the subject of debate in Brussels over the last weeks. Just last week, Thomas, there was the plenary debate on the automotive crisis where a lot of MEPs were giving their views. Our ambition with this debate is, again, to try and refocus onto the opportunities. Thanks to you who found your way through the labyrinth of the Parliament to join us today for this discussion. We've got coffee and water on the side of the room, and yeah, we'll get going. My name's Chris Heron. I'm the Secretary General at AVERE, Europe's e-mobility association.
Hi everyone, I'm Lucie Matera, the Secretary General of ChargeUp Europe. Very nice to see you all here.
Hi everyone, I'm Thomas Pellerin-Carlin. I'm a newly elected MEP. I'm working in the ITRE and ENVI committees. And I'm a social democrat also.
Okay, so there are three things that we would like to do with you today, with Chris, with the panelists that we have, that we're happy to welcome. The first thing we want to do is to refocus the debate on where we think it needs to be, which is on the long-term economic opportunities in e-mobility. We also want to be properly identifying the headwinds our industry is facing. And then, of course, we want to be offering actionable policy solutions that you can take away after the event.
And we're going to do that with 4 stages with you this evening, ladies and gentlemen. The first stage will be the introductions, where Thomas, our host MEP, and Lucy, myself, will provide some framing remarks in terms of our views on the challenges and opportunities ahead. The second stage will be to invite our 3 panellists onto the stage, 3 e-mobility frontrunners, for a debate on their own opportunities and what they need to unlock the business plans that they have. I should say at this stage that Beatrice Jordi, our planned speaker from the European Commission, unfortunately pulled out of this debate at the last minute today due to some short-term urgencies within the European Commission. The third stage will be to have a Q&A with you, our audience, when you will give your questions and comments to our panel. And then the fourth stage, to close it off, will just be some forward remarks about what we need to do now to tackle this change together and also with those outside of this room. The event is planned to finish at 7. We're going to try and be as efficient as possible with time, and if we can finish before then, we definitely will do. Without further ado, though, I'd like to hand over to our host, Thomas Pellerin-Carlin, for his opening remarks on this important discussion. Thomas, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Chris. So thank you all for being here. This is important that we have this discussion here and now, especially after what you may have heard in the plenary in Strasbourg last week, which was, let's be frank, a lot of nonsense being spoken by a lot of people from one specific part of the Parliament, much further to the right. So thank you for being here. It's important that we can have an informed discussion here in Parliament to make sure that we take the best decision for the interests of the Union and of the 450 million people that we represent here. So I want to thank you for being here. I'm happy to be hosting this event. I also want to thank MEPs like Giorgio Gori who are here. And it's important that MEPs also attend those discussions. What I want to do for the introduction is to frame this a little bit historically and then politically. For those of you who may not know me yet, I've been in politics for 7 months now. But before that, I was a researcher for a decade, and I've been teaching at the College of Europe and also at Sciences Po. I'm still teaching actually at Sciences Po Paris every Friday morning. And this Friday morning, I will have a 2-hour lesson on clean mobility in Europe. I'm not going to do the 2-hour lecture, but I just want to emphasize historically where we're at. And I want to bring us back to where we Europeans were in 1899, the year where the first car ever managed to go beyond 100 kilometers an hour. And so the fastest car in human history in 1899 was an electric car. a Franco-Belgian Hamilton, it's also Belgian, so I need to mention that, a Franco-Belgian car called the Jamais Content, which translates as the never happy. And after that, there was actually a lot of reasons why we could have chosen to develop electric cars in the early 20th century. But as you know, it's the internal combustion engine technology that was chosen. And I do emphasize chosen, because a technology is not something that falls from the sky. It's something that is chosen by a group of people. And here also in Parliament today, we are making choices about which technologies to support and which ones to slow down or even to suppress from, let's say, the portfolio of technologies in use in a given society. I could say many things about that choice, but if you read the press from the early 20th century, one of the reasons why the electric car was not chosen, it was because it was silent. And a car that is silent was actually a flaw, because people in those days who were making those choices, kind of the Elon Musk of the time, they liked noise. And they thought that the electric car was, and here I'm quoting, too effeminate, which is really a bad word in an early 20th century speech. So that choice was made. And then over decades, an entire ecosystem was built. And it was built by also public policy choices. The German highways, for instance, were built first and foremost for military reasons. It was built by the Weimar Republic in the early 1930s. And then a lot of them were built in Western Europe and in Southern Europe in the 50s and 60s and gave the car the role that it has today. And there was also a lot of investment in the entire supply chain that for the internal combustion engine goes from drilling oil in what used to be European colonies and then became independent countries to the maintenance of the cars, where a lot of very specific jobs were created in order to maintain this very fragile engine that is the internal combustion engine. And now we are talking about many things about clean mobility, but one of those, which is the purpose of our discussion today, is that technology shift to go from a technology that served us well for more than 100 years towards a new technology, which is the electric engine, regardless of whether the energy is coming from hydrogen or battery, but the electric engine more specifically. And why are we having this discussion? I see at least 4 reasons. The first one is for climate change. The main debate we're having is on a regulation that is called the CO2 standards for cars. And that's because one of the drawbacks of the internal combustion engine, as we know, is the fact that it emits a lot of CO2 in the atmosphere. And whenever we have schools that are shut down in Sicily in spring because of lack of water, that's a result of climate change and therefore also an indirect result of the car emissions that have been produced over the last decades. The second reason that I see is for energy security. If we continue to use and to burn a lot of oil, who will benefit? Who are the geopolitical powers that benefit from us Europeans consuming more and more oil? Saudi Arabia, the Islamic Republic of Iran, the Russian Federation. Not our best friends, to be clear. And still today we continue to buy Russian oil at around, I think it's around €500 million per month that we give to Vladimir Putin for his oil. If we were to shift towards the electric engine, or more broadly, if we were to have a lot of political choices to reduce European consumption of oil, this would actually bring down the oil price on the global market and therefore reduce the capacity of Vladimir Putin to wage his war on Ukraine. Not only because we Europeans will stop buying Russian oil, but because we will send a signal to the market that future oil demand will be smaller, and therefore the price of oil will be slightly lower, and therefore the revenues that Vladimir Putin uses to threaten European peace, well, not even to threaten, to destroy European peace, really, would be reduced. The third point is about our industrial future. It's clear that now it's clear that technologically the electric engine is better than the thermal one, or at least will be very soon. It's more reliable, cheaper to produce, and the car is cheaper to run on electricity than it is on petrol. About a month ago, we had a hearing that was organized by the S&D, the Social Democrat members of the ITRE and the Entrant committees. And we organized the hearing. There were many speakers from trade unions, for instance, but also someone from a big European car manufacturer who told us that, quote, we are one generation late compared to the Chinese when it comes to the electric cars. And the same guy from the same car manufacturer then told me that we need to postpone the CO2 standards regulation. And I struggle to understand, if we are late, how is postponing is going to help us? But let's be clear, we are late. We have underestimated the Chinese. They've taken a lot of advance when it comes to the electric car and the electric engine. We need to speed up in order to remain competitive in our global economy, because you know, as well as I do, the importance of the automotive industry for our jobs, for our also our family members. My own cousin is working in the automotive industry. And the fourth and last point, which I think is not often mentioned enough, is the importance of the electric car for social justice. We have a big division in Europe between the people that are, quote unquote, the winners of globalization, that live in big cities like Brussels or Paris or Berlin, take your pick, and people that feel that they are, and sometimes they are, the losers of globalization. And they tend to come from places where I'm come from, rural Normandy. How can we build a system that benefits them, that increases their purchasing power? One part of the solution is actually the electric car. Because if you need to do, which is my father's case and my mother-in-law's case, if you need to drive 60, 80, 100 kilometers per day to go to the dentist or to go to work, it will be far cheaper for you to do that with an electric car. And therefore, we need to build a system that allows the working men and women of our rural territories to access the electric car. And so I'm going to end on that. As an MEP, obviously, as I said yesterday in plenary, I will fight to maintain what was done in the Green Deal. That's the very least. But I want all of us not only to be defensive, but to be offensive. What can we do better? When can we do more? What is the kind of investment framework? How should we use the Social Climate Fund, for instance, to make sure that small electric cars become accessible for the working men and women that are the backbone, not only of our economy, but also of our democracy? Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. So why electric? I note climate, economic security, industrial future, and social justice. 4 things to take into our panel debate that follows. And you also describe well the split nature of the European Parliament at the moment on this discussion. And we saw a very emotive debate last week. You said it was crazy. Often it went beyond facts on all sides. And it was, so our interest, I think, as organising associations here is to put that focus on what you say. What are the solutions and the actions that need tackling to address some of the headwinds and keep this focus on the long-term opportunities? And Lucy and I will now spend less than 10 minutes of your time to provide some framing remarks on this debate ourselves. But before then, if you change the slide, Chiara, we also wanted to get a picture of you in the room and the audience and when you stand, because I think this is also useful for Thomas and it's useful for our panelists that follow, just to check if where the audience stands on these discussions. So we have a question for you. It's going to be asking you for a show of hands, and that's following last week's Parliament plenary debate on the automotive crisis. What's your view on these headwinds? We have 3 options for you. The first, these headwinds are severe enough that we do need to question the speed of our 2035 transition. Certainly not Thomas' position or ours on the stage, but maybe some people in the audience. Number 2, the middle ground. These headwinds are concerning, but we believe they can be addressed ready for 2025 if we take the right policy action now. Or number 3, more the optimistic options. We shouldn't dismiss these headwinds, but they also shouldn't be a distraction from what's already an achievable 2035 trajectory. So let's see some hands in the air. We'll start with option 1. If you're option 1 and you believe we do need to question the speed of the transition, please hands in the air. Okay, so we see we're a room of friends. Option 2, the middle ground, concerning headwinds, but we can address them with action now. Hands in the air. Okay, I'd say 50, 60%, would you say? And the last one is the optimist in the room. These headwinds shouldn't be dismissed, but our trajectory is already achievable. Hands in the air for the third option. Okay. So I would say as a room, we're about midway between number 2 and 3. Thomas, did you put your hand up? Which
so So obviously, prize like that of all three, but I could vote for one because questioning the speed can also mean accelerating it.
We won't get philosophical, but I think, so between us, I think this shows we're a room of mostly friends of the transition. Some of us do believe more concrete action is needed, but I think also when we have our panel discussion, we can also discuss what do we need to do for those outside of the room who are questioning this and what can we do collectively to make that happen. But now, as mentioned, Lucy and I will give our short framing remarks on seizing e-mobility's growth potential. And the initiative, we've called it Opportunity35, which is basically what we're discussing today. How can we collectively put the focus on the long-term opportunities that lie ahead in this transition? We started this work over the summer before a lot of this debate started in the Parliament, but we'd like to keep that focus as we move forwards. So Lucy, please take us away.
Right, so many of you across the political spectrum in this room probably share the same objective to deliver decarbonization and growth together, right? So not one or the other, both together, right? For that, we must, and we actually can, establish a strong European automotive value chain in 2035 and beyond, ensuring electrification remains an engine for growth and jobs in an industry that is today a strong provider of both. Crucially, this vision of delivering decarbonization and growth together is shared by CEOs in the European automotive industry. I'm not going to read all of those quotes today. They're all telling the same story. Electromobility is the right way forward, economically, for the climate, and very practically for more and more customers, in the wise word of the CEO of Volkswagen. E-mobility is already mainstream, as many of you already know, with strong market dynamic already in place, right? So at the end of 2023, you had 22 more times EVs on e-road than 4 years before. You also had a very strong growth of EV charging infrastructure, both public and private, to well over 7 million charging points today. And what those numbers are painting is a picture of real market dynamic that must be preserved, bearing in mind that behind each one of those numbers, you have very heavy investment that took place.
And now we have e-mobility in the mainstream, but we need to stay on track to 2035, as Thomas said. We know in 2035 there are opportunities to seize. Thomas mentioned several of them. Economic growth is definitely one, which we'll detail further. Cost savings for consumers, as mentioned on the social justice point. Grid flexibility, the massive savings for the grid and consumers from the flexibility these vehicles can provide. And everything to do with digitalization as well. But we know as well that there is a discussion within the European Parliament and elsewhere to put a false choice on the table. A false choice to delay the electric vehicle transition, which for us would only leave us further behind our goals. Our view is that the necessary choice is the only choice that we can make is to hold our course towards 2035, tackling these speed bumps and tackling these headwinds together. Because we know that Europe can still seize an e-mobility future of economic growth. There was a study that McKinsey released just 2 weeks ago looking into Europe's economic potential in its automotive sector. McKinsey did a lot of scenarios, but their full potential scenario concluded that if we take advantage of e-mobility, Europe could have a 2.2 trillion euro automotive sector value added in 2035, a 17% increase from what we have today. That scenario is still very much still to play for. How can we achieve it? 4 key actions. Number 1, of course, to keep our EU automakers strong in this transition. But number 2, we'll also need to attract investment from new market entrants from across the world under the right conditions for Europe. Number 3, fundamentally, is to secure a homegrown battery supply chain and all of the jobs that that will bring us, from the refining to the cells to more. And number 4 is to capitalize on the massive digitalization opportunities that go alongside this transition.
So the future of economic growth that Chris just described will also create job opportunities across technical skills on our continent. So you know the job creation potential from the BCG study that you've seen before. Since then, we've had research with updated numbers, and if you take just 2 of the components of the much broader e-mobility ecosystem that is being built, namely EV charging and battery manufacturing as examples, you can see that Europe is on track to create close to 2,000 jobs in the latter and over 220,000 jobs in the former.
And what's really fundamental then is that we move forward with an eye on this jobs potential and not losing our shift of focus away. And let me be clear, easing off now, we know will have serious and lasting consequences. Thomas alluded to these in his remarks. Firstly, Europe will be stepping back from the global EV shift. We know from the study from McKinsey, they calculated that if we're not able to catch up on the head start that China has, there's a risk of 25% of our market share being lost in the automotive value chain if we can't capture those benefits. And it's already a massive pie. The EV market globally totals €1 trillion today, and that will grow and grow. Doing so will be permanently handing the lead to others. While Europe wobbles, China does push-ups. 50% of car sales in China today are already electric or plug-in, and we know that if we're slowing down, the lead that they have will only increase. And then thirdly, turning away ecosystem investment, going counter to all of the other strategic initiatives that Europe has. ChargeUp Europe has done some research that projects that if we slow down in our ambitions, we'll be delivering 20% fewer charging jobs in 2035 than we could do now. And we also know that would send a massively negative signal to the struggling EU battery supply chain trying to scale up.
So the EU clearly should not be easing off, as you clearly heard from Chris, but we're also not oblivious to the context and the headlines that you've been reading lately in the press. So those headwinds exist, but we need to properly define them to solve them and remain focused on their root causes, namely competitiveness and demand, as we'll see with two examples. This notion that there is a slowdown in EV sales this year and investment being concerned in battery. So I'm going to start with EV sales because you've been hearing that a lot over the past few weeks, right? EV sales are dropping in the EU. We need to slow down. This is too hard. We need to revise the 2035 trajectory. So question, does Europe have an electric sales crisis? Spoiler, no it doesn't, right? So the complete data picture said you had a bump in the road in 2024. In the first half of the year, EV sales in the year 27 actually continued to grow, and if you exclude Germany, which indeed dragged down the EU market, you had a very healthy pace of 9%. And we already expect stronger sales of EVs in 25 already with the introduction of new models. So we're calling on your support to avoid a panic reaction to something that is temporary in nature and geographically confined. What we do want to see your support instead is for measures to improve EV volumes, targeting in particular the demand side, together with the introduction by EU car makers of smaller, more affordable EVs to democratize access to e-mobility.
The second of those challenges was competitiveness. Does Europe have a battery investment crisis? If we move to the next slide again. And the answer is yes, but we can do something about it. The headwind here is that just this year, 300 gigawatt hours of investments across the battery supply chain have been cancelled or delayed in 2024. That's 1/5 of our 2030 pipeline, and European champions like Northvolt, many of you all read, are under pressure. Many contributing factors: scale-up challenges for young companies, the ever-growing Chinese competition operating at scale, and high EU business cost. That is a big competitiveness challenge. It's not the only competitiveness challenge, and it can be solved now. Here, and that's where we really need to come to Thomas and colleagues in the European Parliament, is to say it's not only about looking at these problems, but also putting forward solutions. And what we need is really an all-in European effort to scale up this battery supply chain in the next 2 years. Crucially, that means we need to keep our certainty of our 2035 targets for these companies, but also deliver that industrial policy to level the playing field.
So it is within our collective power to stay on track and to seize Opportunity35 with your support.
So let's maintain our clear common ground of shared European values. Let's ally decarbonisation and growth together.
Let's resist the false narratives as slowing down would mean stepping out of the race.
Let's follow our shared pathway to achieve real, lasting transport decarbonisation, EU 27-wide growth and decent jobs for all, showing that these three things are not needing to contradict each other, but should be delivered together.
Our sectors are committed to delivering and actually making very good progress, but we need your support to fully unlock Opportunity35.
Thank you. And there is a website now available which collects a load of data that is backing up these arguments, which you can now find online, which has been a joint project from ChargeUp Europe and AVERE, and which will inform a lot of our discussions with parliamentarians and other policymakers in the weeks to follow. Super. Thank you. Now it's a great pleasure to invite our three panellists to the stage. So I'm going to bring them up all together. We've got Céline Domecq, who's the Director of Governmental Affairs for Volvo Cars. We have Bart Lubbers, who's the co-founder and chairman of Fastned. And we have Carla Detrieux, who's the Director of Business Development for Volta Trucks. Thomas, if you want to stay, if you want to go, you feel free. So Thomas has kindly, with the absence of our European Commission colleague, Thomas kindly offered to stay and join our debate as our regulated perspective. So we'll bring him in through the discussion. So excellent. We're now onto the panel phase of our discussion. We'll probably be spending around 45 minutes to 50 minutes on this debate. And I'm going to start by asking each of our three panelists an opening question. We'll hear their short 2 to 3 minute remarks, and then we'll start a panel debate all amongst us on the issues presented. Céline, I'm going to start with you and Volvo Cars. You remain resolute in your strategy that Europe and the world's future is electric, while at the same time you've reflected just last month that the transition to electrification is not a linear one. So my question is, what does Volvo Cars need from Thomas, from the new European Commission, to ensure that you are able to fulfill those ambitions you have and that Europe is delivering the economic benefits of this transition?
Thank you. Chris, thanks for the invitation. Good evening, everybody. Let me start maybe with why we think it's the right way to go forward. As you know, we were among the first traditional car makers to announce that we would go full electric. And it's true that in September, we had to adjust our ambitions. Our ambition is global, and we see that in some part of the globe, it will take us a bit longer than planned. But the end game is not changing. We want to go full electric. Why is that? In part, and I think you had the quote from my CEO earlier, if the car industry wants to tackle its emission, the biggest chunk of the emission is the usage of the car. So if you go electric, then you already solve that problem, and then you can focus on the rest, which is, the production phase and so on. So that's the first thing. That's the biggest thing we can do to actually contribute against climate change. Second thing, electrification is only the top of the iceberg. And the debate should not just be about, we are shifting from a propulsion mode, like from a nice engine to an e-motor. Actually, what we are shifting is a car completely. We are developing a software-defined vehicle. We are going into core compute. And these AI will play a major role as well. So we are actually developing new technologies which are very important for our sector if we want to stay competitive, but which are actually positive for the whole economy. It's research that we need not only in our sector. And second thing, we look at the product, the car. But when you talk electrification, you should look at the ecosystem. So this debate should go beyond whether OEMs can go electric or not, because today the car is a means of transportation from A to B, and that's about it. And most of the day it's parked and not doing much. With electrification, the car can become actually more, because you can support the grid if you have bidirectional charging, so you can help integrate renewable energy. For people, when you're not using your car during the day, well, either with digital and data, you can actually share it with others and develop new business model, or you can leave it parked. But if it's charging, if it's helping balance the grid, you can also get benefits as an owner of the car. So you're developing a full new system. And so it's a bit reductive when you're saying, okay, OEMs are struggling. Yes, we are. It's a tough time. It's a bump in the road, but next year doesn't necessarily, in pure economic terms, next year doesn't look necessarily better. We have the challenges. But we should not forget that we are much broader, and the debate is much broader. The investments are not just OEMs investments, ChargeUp, like all the charging points have made investment, battery investments. We should not forget about these guys, because they've put money on the table as well. And if we shift the target now, well, then they're also standing to lose out, not just us. So that's really, I think, what I would like to say. Maybe we can get back later to, or do you want, can I continue a bit more on our asks?
Our asks? Quick ask, and we'll revisit them after.
Okay, good. Well, let me start with the first ask to politicians, which is don't change the target now. You've set the target. It's very clear. We have 10 years to get there. So let's work towards it. That would be my first ask.
Super. So I note e-mobility, a tip of the iceberg. It's not just the electric vehicle. There's a whole ecosystem at stake. But at the same time, there are real headwinds. 2025, there may still be real headwinds. So we do need to act. But on the subject of the ecosystem, that's the perfect time to turn to Bart from Fastned. And Bart, last month, the Fastned CEO, he released a big public letter which gave a very big picture perspective on the e-mobility transition, and also your confidence as a company in terms of the direction of travel and the headwinds that we're facing. At the same time, charging infrastructure is often brought up as one of the key limiting factors to adoption by consumers. So what do you think are the actions for Europe to get through today's uncertainty towards the future that you as Fastned want to be part of?
Well, let me start with thank you for inviting me for this panel. And of course, I agreed with everything is said before. Fastned is a European company, and we built charging stations along the highway, only on high traffic locations. We started the company 12 years ago because one of the reasons was my father, who passed away, drove an electric car, a converted electric car. They took the gasoline engine out and they put an electric motor in. Of course, there was only AC charging, so he got stuck very often. Had to plug in at a bar or a farm. And then I saw a small news item that there was a small startup at the Technical University of Delft in Amsterdam. They were developing fast chargers, DC chargers. So I went to this company and they said, well, you're at the right moment because we need an investor. So I invested in this company and everybody was an engineer and I'm an historian. And I said, well, it's interesting, but who's going to build the network of fast chargers? Because if you cannot charge along the road, you have no freedom. And the essence of a car is freedom. I met Michiel Langezaal, my companion. He was working at Appion, at this company. And he said the same thing. We need locations to charge. And that's the reason why we started Fastned, to have a network in Europe of fast charging stations at high traffic locations. In that time, 2012, by the way, Appion was sold to ABB, so the charging division of ABB is originally this small startup from Delft. And we made a plan and we said, okay, we're going to focus only on fast charging stations, large fast charging stations with multiple chargers on high traffic locations. We're now 12 years further. We have about over 300 locations, over 300 people. We're in most European countries. But if you ask me what's the bottleneck for us, it's always locations, locations, locations. We need locations to build fast charging stations. And yeah, the way to get locations is tenders. It's very simple for governments, just give out tenders because there are enough private companies that love to build charging stations to give energy to the electric cars and freedom to the electric drivers.
Brilliant, thank you. So you've redefined for me what an EV frontrunner is with the story of your father. But I know as well, location, location, location is really key for charging as we go forwards. Carla, to turn to you, Volta Trucks is making a big comeback, we've seen, and we're sure you've seen the long-term opportunity for the heavy-duty segment in terms of electrification. So what do you as a growing champion in this space need from an EU policy to scale up for heavy-duty vehicles? Please.
Thank you for the hospitality. Why we're here, our raison d'être is very simple and it's very honorable. It's not only to solve for the global and climate problematic, but also to solve for some very profound social challenges, which are the driver shortage. So we know that we are lacking drivers all across Europe, and I'm not talking about only the lack of generations, so younger generations, but also a lack of females. So we're counting for only 2% of women in this industry, and 55 years old as an average age for drivers. To finish off with the numbers and the raison d'être, the safety element is also extremely important to us. We are selling big trucks, 16-ton trucks, and these are, in London, responsible for 78% of fatal accidents, despite it being only 4% of the traffic. As you said, we've experienced a very interesting challenge. Interesting in the sense that it's a great learning curve for us as a micro element within this very large ecosystem, but it should also be an important lesson for this market. Exactly a year ago, I had the same passion, but definitely not the same feeling because I had nothing to lose. I was sitting at the United Nations Investment Forum in Abu Dhabi, and 8 hours before, 950 people received this email saying, game over. Why game over? Because we were an aggregator. So we were sourcing components off the shelf from established industry leaders. And obviously, we made that mistake of relying on a single source of battery. The battery supplier themselves faced a very challenging chapter. And the ricochet effect it had on us was that we weren't able to raise our latest fundraise. We had raised 550 million euros to date, and we were in that last round, whereas we had trucks on the road, on the production line, on the customers' operations. It just highlights the importance of funding in this immature market. But with full of hope, we managed to get the business back on track, get new investors. We now have the production line up and running, and we're getting orders in. What we see, though, is a very slow or very a pace of adoption which needs a lot of support. But also, I think, three main things. An understanding of how fragmented the value chain is, the transportation value chain. We sell to the very well-known brands, right? We sell to the UPS, the DB Schenkers. You guys know these very flashy brands, but the reality is, once you scratch a little bit the surface, you understand that this transport is delegated to majorly SMEs, operators that have 1, 2, 3, 5 trucks, that are looking at margins that are roughly around 2% to 10%, right? So we're talking about a transition that needs to be inclusive. This is my first point. Inclusion to operators that must have access to such technologies. Because we all know carbon emissions or carbon savings, I should say, are the new currency, but our customers for now are not able to access it. So understanding how we can develop frameworks or incentives on how to reunite and make sure that the transition is as inclusive as possible. I have 2 more points. I don't know if I have enough time.
Good.
Thank you.
But be quick.
Okay, I lost it. The next piece is making sure that we build confidence. I told you about our customers. Well, these customers unfortunately cannot rely on stop-and-go policies anymore. They need to understand that this is a future-proof scheme of regulations and incentives and penalties as well that give them the confidence to invest. The investment model is very different. We're not talking about a technology that you invest on the short term, right? Like the amortissement. Somebody help me with this.
Amortization?
That's it.
Amortization.
Thank you. You must look at it on a long-term basis, right? So it's making sure that there's continuity in the regulations and in all the schemes that we put in place. And if possible, because we also talk to international organizations, making sure that there's homogeneity, that we try and make it as easy as possible for international organizations, because you go from, as we know, one locality to the other, one country to the other, or region to the other. Everything is extremely different. So how can we coordinate in a better way to make sure that our customers have an easier task? And I have a lot more complicated point, but I think we'll come back to it.
Okay, we'll come back to the complicated point. But what's clear, clear from your story is the importance of, and we were talking about the ecosystem throughout this, and you've been part of an ecosystem which has had vulnerabilities to it, and this collective push to build up together is really essential.
Yeah, the definition of resilience, let me tell you.
And I know the importance of policy certainty as well. So we've heard from our 3 business speakers, different visions, different business plans for moving forward. Before we have a round of discussions, Thomas, any reflection from your side on what you've heard from our 3 speakers?
So I hear the constant call for predictability, and it's always a question I was asking the people that were lobbying me to review, especially the 2025, let's say, implementation of the CO2 standards for cars, because they were asking for predictability and then asking me as a policymaker to do exactly the opposite, which was always a bit confusing. Reflecting on this, I think we need to understand also what's the situation. I'm mostly talking about cars now, car manufacturers, but car manufacturers had a field day over the last few years because they gained through impact of COVID, the microchips crisis, and people were struggling to actually buy a new car. And for pretty much the first time in the EU car making history, there are actually more demand for cars than they could supply, which is pretty much unheard of over the last decades. And so suddenly, car makers gained a lot of pricing power. And they were able to make cars more expensive, not necessarily by increasing the cost of the car, but by saying to the customer, if you want to have that car in the coming month, you maybe need to buy this extra option and this extra option, which we know is one way for car manufacturers to make a lot of money. And so they became extremely profitable, far more than they were in, I don't know, the early 2010s, for instance. And I have the impression that a few people at the top of those companies thought that this was the new normal. And so we are in that situation, and this is like everything that I'm saying now is unrelated to the shift to electricity. It's just now we're coming back to normal. Microchips are available again, and we come back to the normal situation where there is overcapacity, or at least there is more capacity to build cars than there is demand for cars in Europe. And so the margins are going down. And car manufacturers, or not all of them, but at least one from my country, is blaming this on the European regulation, which is a bit puzzling. But here we need, and I'm going to end on the financing challenge, because it's a moment where they have car manufacturers have less money on the table than they had in 2020, 21, 22. They just come back to kind of the equilibrium, let's say, the natural equilibrium of the European car market. But this happens at a moment where they need to invest much more. And so that's a big challenge, and that goes beyond regulation. But how can we make sure that we have a genuine deal, clean industry deal or green deal, whatever you want to name it, where the shareholders of those car companies will accept that they're going to have a little bit less share buybacks, a little bit less dividend than what they got accustomed to. Because for a period, and I don't know, but better, of, 5 to 10 years, there is a need for the car manufacturers to invest much more, and that will they will still be profitable, but maybe a little bit less than what people expected a few years ago.
Céline, maybe you could come in on, we've spoken about car manufacturers overall, but maybe any comments you have on that view of the market, but you also mentioned it is hard to sell electric cars at the moment. Why is that the case? What can change for you by next year that would make it easier for a company like Volvo to meet those objectives?
Sure. I think at the moment it's hard to sell cars generally because so it's not just BEVs. We were just hoping that BEVs would sell better. And I think you said it's 9% growth if we remove Germany. I think we were hoping for, more along the two-digit kind of side. So it is a slowdown for what we had expected. But generally, the market is down because the economic situation is not good. And until the economic situation gets better and until the geopolitical context gets a bit easier and people regain a bit of confidence, it's going to stay tough. Regarding investments, yes, indeed, that's a big question. I mean, we have not given dividends to our shareholders for quite a while. And we have already announced that we will not do it until 2026 because every euro we earn is put back into our transition. And of course, it's tough, and investors are not always very happy about that. And if you look at the share prices of the automakers at the moment, they are not good, and ours are particularly not good. But that's a choice we've made because we need to invest. It can be understood that for other OEMs, the temptation to, get as much profit as they can from their traditional business is heavy, especially when the pressure from the investors. So that's something that, if can be tackled, that will help as well, to reward those who are willing to make this choice, not to give out dividends and to reinvest in electrification. But that's definitely one of the challenges for OEMs at the moment, that's for sure. What would be helpful? Any measure on the demand side. And of course, we are not asking for, we know the budgets are stretched in most of the countries and they are looking at how to make, economies everywhere. So when we come and say, well, please help people to buy an EV, for the countries who can, sure, do it. And try not to do it for 6 months and then say like, oh, we are stopping and then start again and stop again. And when you can't give out money, you could at least try to have coherent policies that at least push towards the right type of motorization. An example, in Sweden, not only they stopped the bonus, Okay, fair enough. They said they would invest the money they saved into the charging infrastructure. That would be a fair deal. But then in terms of taxation, they switched and they made petrol less expensive. That's not the right sign. And that's, in a way, you're not bringing money in advance for the member states. You just give a coherent taxation policy and that would already be super helpful. You can have other measures. You can support charging points. If you can install charging points at home or in your street, that would also, help for that. If it's not to buy the vehicle, that would help as well. So any demand side measure would be welcome in the next few years because we need to go through this rough patch to be on the other side. And by the moment we will have made our investments and we will be ready to be full electric, we foresee profitability. And we are quite confident that our competitors can be as well. So it's really getting us through these few years until we are at the point where we can be full electric. And then profitability will be there. Then you look at the bigger picture. And then, of course, energy prices, if they could be more competitive in Europe, that would help. And, of course, we need the supply chain. We need the supply chain here. So investing, and for batteries, because you mentioned scale, you mentioned competition from China, mainly, as barriers to batteries. But I think Europe also needs a lot of R&D in batteries because batteries need to be good. Yeah. And today, I'm sorry, but the European batteries are not, the cells are not as good as what we get in China. So it's very hard to give a customer a battery which is more expensive and less good than what you would get from a third country. So that's something that we need to tackle very urgently as well.
And just on the line, so that's also one of the reasons why collectively in Parliament we are pushing for protecting the Horizon Europe budget. Because we know that there is a need for money for research and innovation. We know that part of that has to be public money, especially for the more fundamental research, but also for a lot of applied research. And our position as Parliament, from S&D to EPP and many other groups, is to protect the European Commission proposal, which, just to put a number, the Council wants to cut the budget for Horizon Europe by 400 million for next year. And here again, we're talking about predictability. We have agreed a multi-annual financial framework. That's kind of where we should be, rather than having that short-sighted view that sadly a lot of, well, not member states, let's be accurate here, head of units of some budgetary units inside some governments have a vision that is more or less an accounting vision than an economist vision. And we need to invest more in R&D, generally speaking, but also for battery to make them more efficient, but also to prepare the next generation of batteries that we will absolutely need.
Yeah, I think there's a real urgency here too to do this while companies like Volvo are still making choices on suppliers, because in a few years' time those supply chains get set forever as well, which is a concern. But Carla, I saw you. I think you were maybe looking forward to come in on either the batteries or the finance point from a HDV perspective.
Well, it's the exact same context. I guess we rely on our side, being an aggregator, we rely on every component or part. But I must say the battery is probably the riskiest element, and it's also the core and the heart of our vehicle and every vehicle out there. So definitely I'm putting an emphasis on making sure that we have a reliable battery value chain. But maybe focusing on the batteries, and this is something that strikes me every time when I speak to people that are in the energy ecosystem, and at the same time speaking to my customers. There's a very big tension. What I mean here, we are facing, let's say, some challenges with the adoption of EVs, especially in the truck industry. What I should say is that an electric truck is 2 or 3 times as much as the equivalent in ICE. Even though there's demand, obviously we need to incentivize this uptake. And the battery is, again, the most expensive component. And on the other side, in 5 to 10 years, all I hear about is ensuring that we have a future-proof grid architecture, and how valuable these second-hand batteries and how promising the second-hand market can be. So there's that tension between the uptake now and what we need in 5 to 10 years. So really it's understanding how, as member states and as public and private coalitions, we can incentivize the uptake of batteries now to have them available in 5 to 10 years. Maybe through residual value funds or residual value guarantees, but making sure that there's this pocket of incentives to make sure that we have the batteries rolling out on the road to serve our customers, to serve our communities, but that they are available as second-hand assets in 5 to 10 years' time. I hope that makes sense for you, Thomas.
Maybe to bring you in, Bart, we've mentioned demand, and charging infrastructure. What are your needs from? Is it a need for finance, as Céline said, or is it a need for stability? What would you ask for to make sure you can roll out and continue to roll out at the speed required? And then just an alert to the audience, we'll be going to you for questions and comments yourself, so please get them ready after this. Bart.
Okay, maybe a bit more. It all starts with climate change and pollution. And what we need to fight climate change and pollution is an energy transition from fossil fuels to clean fuels, or electricity, as we use for electric cars. But how can we stimulate that? We can stimulate it through the consumers, because they buy the cars and they drive the cars. So a good step would be that the taxation is completely dependent on the level of pollution and emissions. So zero for zero pollution, and a lot for a lot of pollution. That would be a good start, and I don't envy Thomas because he's the politician. He has to advocate this. But I think it starts with that, and then logically we can also come to the car industry, and I'm really worrying because I'm European, and I would love to see the European car industry survive, because in my life we already lost the market for personal computers, then we lost the market for mobile phones. And I'm afraid that if we don't do the good things, that we lose also the car market. And how can we save the car market for Europe to stimulate the consumers to buy European cars, like the Chinese are doing? And like extra tariffs won't help us, because China is already in front of us, and they will be more in front of us if we slow down the development of electric cars. They won't stop. So I think we have to use every means to stimulate the demand for cars, electric cars in Europe, to survive with this industry. And for us personally, it's less of a problem because we focus on locations, and locations happen to be in Europe, and we are a European company, and yeah.
So for all our panelists, it's really sensible and fast and consistent and coherent demand measures can make a real difference. Often these are the member state competences rather than the EU competences, but clearly if we look at 2025 and what we can do, this is a big part of the picture. Thomas, you wanted to? Yeah,
briefly, there is one thing to do. I mean, it's not 25, it's 26, but with social climate fund. I mean, the ballpark figure, but please correct me if I misremember the figure, is 60 billion euros. And this is to make sure that we have a socially just transition while the ETS2, which targets emissions coming from the building sector and the road transport sector, are well addressed. One scheme that worked partially in France and that I hear may be rolled out soon in Poland is the social leasing scheme, where and I think that's something interesting to look at, whether we can pool this at the EU level in order to provide what car manufacturers need, which is volume. We can here, because this is partially funded through public money, have, if I can say that nasty word, local consent requirements. I know it triggers some people. But anyway, in any way, shape, or form, something that assures that a big part of the value chain will be European. We can target that also on the kind of people that, on the kind of cars that we need, which are small cars. So we're not talking about like 2.5 ton SUVs. That's not what people need, working men and women. They need lighter cars, 1 ton, 1 ton 5, depending on the 1.5 ton, depending on the kind of car that is needed, and target this social leasing scheme to, let's say, the 40% of the Europeans that have the smallest revenues and that live in rural areas, let's say 15 to 20 kilometers at least away from work. So that's something that has already been done in France with I mean, it was so successful that the French government stopped it because that's the way the French government has been working over the last 7 years. But anyways, that was like free attack on Emmanuel Macron. Sorry, should not do that in Parliament, in the European Parliament. More seriously, like the scheme that was rolled out in France, I see that as a good prototype of something that should be scaled up, at the very least in the countries that want it, which could be France and Poland, but ideally as something that would be done at the EU level. Because here we could say, and don't quote me on that, I'm just making up the number as I speak, car manufacturer, you have 1 million cars that are battery electric cars, small size, that will be bought by the European Union as a whole, mostly with national social climate fund money. And that is what kind of car manufacturers could be helpful for them in terms of providing demand and volume. And here politically, it's also something that we show that the kind of transition that we want is a just one. It's just for workers because those will be mostly manufactured in Europe, obviously with components that can come from abroad. And it will be also socially fair in the people that will benefit from those cars that are working men and women living in the rural areas that feel forgotten by the European Union, and sometimes rightly so. And I think, the best way to make sure that someone change its own feeling is actually to prove that feeling is not founded. So we need to do something that is visible, and that kind of social leasing scheme for European workers could be helpful.
So visible and a thoughtful use of the tools available to us right now. And as you say as well, there's a lot of member states in Europe, and there are some good examples across those member states to learn from. There's also a lot of bad examples, but potentially bringing up the good examples to European level is good too. At this stage, you're going to ask the room if other people would have questions that they'd like to add into the debate. If you do, put your hand up. Otherwise, I'll continue with my questions. So please, people in the room. Matt, please, go ahead.
I have a question to Mr. Pellerin-Carlin. We don't expect a lot of regulations. Sorry, Matt Urson from Fastned, Director of Government Affairs for Fastned. My question would be regarding what to expect from the European Parliament in this new session. We don't expect a lot of new regulatory initiatives. So obviously we are expecting certainty and clarity regarding the existing goals, but there are a couple of still initiatives that are of importance, and one of them is greening of corporate fleets. What is your position on this, and how do you see any support that you and your group could provide to these initiatives?
I missed the critical 2 words. On which topic precisely?
Greening of corporate fleets. Because this is directly touching the issue of affordability. So beyond social lease programs and other incentives, with these cars coming to the second-hand market, will be quite a game changer.
Let's come in on corporate fleets.
I've not dig into the specific topic of corporate fleet enough for me to be feeling. Let's say at ease to give you an answer. So just saying that I will specifically look into that also with my good friend Bruno Tobak, who is from Belgium, because I understand that there is a specific Belgian dimension to the corporate fleet here. But maybe to provide a broader answer on the issue of democratization of the electric car over the past decades, any kind of technological improvement in the car industry came first for the more luxury cars, and then it kind of trickled down. That's one of the few sectors where trickle-down economics actually works. It really trickled down, and the example for that is, for instance, air conditioning used to be a luxury, 30 years ago, and now it's pretty much the common thing that you have. And even the people that buy a Dacia now complain that they don't have air conditioning if they did not specifically order for it, because we grew accustomed to that. So in the long term, the electric car will be democratic through the second-hand market, and obviously the faster, and that's where your corporate fleet question comes in, the faster we can, the more we can accelerate that process, the better. But I think politically it will not suffice, also because the TS2 is going to bite us from 2027 onwards, and we can't be again in a situation where we have an EU decision that increases the cost of petrol without having the EU being part of the solution to make sure that the people that need it, which are the people that would buy a second-hand car, can actually have access to an electric car. So that's why I was emphasizing the importance there of social leasing, to make sure that this democratization can happen virtually now, or rather in the 1 or 2 years that we have before ETS2 starts to bite us. And here I'm saying that as a Frenchman who was living in France during the Yellow Vest movement. Obviously, this was a multifaceted movement, but this was triggered by the increase of the cost of petrol. And I fear that we may be heading in that direction in 2027 in several EU member states, which will make our discussion very, 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 very difficult. So there is also a degree of urgency there to provide battery electric cars for the people that need it to mitigate the risk of having some kind of a yellow vest-like movement in several member states in a couple of years.
Brilliant. I see a hand right at the back. Please go ahead.
Apologies, I was late. Pedro Gomes from Polis Network, so a network of cities and regions. And thank you so much for this opportunity. I just wanted to maybe highlight something. We talked about cars, electrification of cars, and how to make electric cars more affordable. But as a network of cities, also for us, it's important that looking other aspects of electrification, in particular, public transport, shared mobility, because if we just replace one-to-one, we continue with zero-emission congestion, zero-emission road sinistrality. So for us, it's really important also to use this e-mobility transition to a shift of paradigm. And a concern, first of all, please help us, and we are here also to help you, to not postpone the 2035 ICE ban, because it's fundamental and it's really important that there's no political zigzag. But also it's important to look into not just about cars and affordability of cars. I understand that for rural areas and other specific situations, it's indeed the only option. But if you want to bridge the gap between urban, peri-urban and rural, public transport is going to be important. And when we look at the electrification of buses and coaches, we also see that a lot of our members are asking, so which technology should we aim for the next 10 years, for a tender of procurement of 1,500 buses, something like that. So what should we do? And what we see also from their remarks is that the European industry at the moment is not responding. So they get kind of pushed by price and quantity to purchase, for example, Chinese buses, so not just cars. And this is also a big issue that I hope that in the Social Climate Fund discussions, for example, this is not just about helping people vulnerable or people in risk of transport poverty, which is now the concept, are able to afford an electric car, but also making sure that we provide options. And these also include electrification of other forms of transport, so public transport and others.
I see that Carla wants to come in quickly, and then maybe Thomas again. So Carla.
Thank you. And maybe Thomas, to give some context, we see the same thing at a micro level in our customers' depot. So when a fleet manager wants to purchase an electric truck, usually they're expected to do the exact same job as its ICE equivalent. So they basically try and replace, and when it doesn't do the job, they get frustrated. But I think this is where the opportunity to have digitalization and decarbonization coming at pair and really looking at the data, and instead of doing as we've done it for the last 20 years or 50 years, really take the opportunity to do something different. So it can be dimensions, it can be means of transport, it can be looking at how we do our operational routes. I'll give you an example. We work with a retailer, a very famous retailer, that usually takes its hundreds of vans across a specific city. Instead of doing the same thing but with electric vans, they take a truck, a 16-ton truck with about 40 meter cubes, and they load it with parcels. And instead of having, again, 100 vans, they have 4 cargo bikes coming at the back of the vehicle, and the vehicle is going around this specific city and sitting and stopping in strategic spots. And this cargo bike is doing the last meter. And this is just sitting down, brainstorming, how can we do different? And we can find solutions. And I'm sure it applies to all passenger vehicles and all sorts of transportation. Maybe to highlight this comment.
Yeah, 100% agree with the need for a paradigm shift. Since the topic was very much focused on the car, I really stayed on that topic. But since you give me the opportunity to broaden that a bit, the fun thing about me being an MEP now is, as I was a researcher for 10 years, like you can check what I what is my opinion, because like this is public information. Like I wrote papers for years, and I didn't change my mind on 99% of the stuff, and then the rest obviously is linked to the need to update one's thinking over time. And so, for instance, in a paper that was authored by Emily Magdalinsky on clean mobility, we were actually focusing on the need first to reduce the need for mobility, to move from a society where every year we increase the number of kilometers that we do to a society where we can actually stabilize that or even decrease that. Some people may see this as being punishment, but if we think about it for a second, I mean, where I'm from, the main reason why people do more kilometers is because local public services were shut down. And those are public services, but also the kind of private stuff linked to health. My mother-in-law, who lives in rural Normandy, she now needs to drive for 120 kilometers just to go to the dentist. And this is like, I don't know where you're from, but this is absolutely normal in rural France to do this. And so the first thing would be to reduce this kind of forced mobility. Like nobody wants to drive the kids to school for more than 20 kilometers. Like if you have to do that, it's because there is something that needs to be addressed. And a lot of that has to do healthcare would be national or regional level depending on the competence, but for primary school, that would be actually a city competence, and I know a lot of them are working to do this. And then how we can expand public transport. There's a need also to develop local railways. In Europe, we've invested a lot for the kind of high-speed train that I just took to be here, so I'm happy that it exists. But we also need to develop the kind of local railway that will connect cities that you guys have never heard about, Bernières-sur-Mer and Mézidon-Canon, for instance, which are two small cities, one in the north and one in the south of Caen, which is 100,000 inhabitants back in Normandy still. So that's central. Cities also have a big role to play in, if they can, in order to pull demand for electric buses and make sure that those buses can be made in Europe. When we were campaigning during the elections, we visited an electric bus factory in Cléon, which is close to Rouen, in the northeast of Normandy. And it's interesting, the story of that industrial sites, because that is really the heart of the Renault thermal engine historically. That's really where Renault has been producing its thermal engine for a bunch of cars. And they continue to do that, but now they produce much fewer thermal engines, and so they have more space. Part of that space is dedicated to build on the same site the electric engine, and part of that space was freed up. And now what's there is an electric bus manufacturing company. And they settled there because the city of Rouen said, if you settle there, we're going to buy 100 buses, which... the electric bus is something that is, let's say, far less automatized than the car. So 100 buses is significant in that specific field. And I think this is the kind of approach that we need to have there. And finally, on e-bikes and cargo, this was mentioned, but that's kind of, we tend to forget, the role of logistics there. I've been looking at the investment done by Geoffroy de Roux de Bézieux, who is it was the president of the MEDEF, which is kind of the French version of Business Europe or the BDI or Confindustria, depending on where you're coming from. And he has invested a lot in e-bikes, and especially for cargo. And I think that's also a promising field. And here, I don't really know what an EU policymaker can do, but I've got a lot of ideas about what local policymakers are already doing and could maybe do more to provide, let's say, more space for this kind of diverse mobility that goes from, heavy trucks to light bikes and everything in between.
Thank you. One question. We're running to time nearly. I just have one question for the panel to answer before we move to closing remarks, and that is maybe that, the elephant in the room is that we are a room of people who more or less believe the same thing, because the polls showed that, and there is a large group of people outside of the room, maybe even with the majority in the European Parliament, that completely have a different narrative for the e-mobility shift. It's anti-consumer, it's anti-European, it's anti-jobs, it's pro-Chinese. So maybe a question to end with is like, what can we do about the level of misinformation in the rest of this debate, which is happening outside of this room, which is proving to be quite powerful and dominant? And maybe just panelists, all three, can come in, and we'll hear from Thomas, and then we'll go to closing remarks. So who wants to take that question first? But you're leaning forwards.
I think most of the people... Oh, thank you, Carla. I think most of people in this room have the same experience that seeing is believing, and then the first time you're in a Tesla, you believe it. Electric car is just better, and now it has to become cheaper. And then it's better and cheaper than a fossil fuel car, and that's the best argument.
Okay. Carla, would you like to?
Well, same. You know, I noted down on my iPad, take a Volta Zero to the Parliament to show Thomas and his crew that it's here, because there's one in Brussels, and you have to see it to believe it. Yeah. So yeah, one is with our customer PPD, who works for IKEA here in Brussels. IKEA having to be net zero by 2025, so it's happening. What I want to say to these people is. What we should do as a group is to keep, I don't really like this word, but educating them about the opportunities that lie ahead, and really keep inspiring them, because we tend to forget, yes, there's a lot of hurdles, yes, there's a lot of challenges, but this is a profound industrial revolution for us as member states, and it doesn't only imply industrialization. It's a social transition. It's an environmental challenge. I mean, it's so wide that we have to grasp this opportunity, and I think the only way is to keep inspiring people again.
Inspire and show. Céline, what would you add?
I think one voice we didn't really hear yet, and I don't think they are maybe in the room, is the suppliers. And I think that's really one part that we need to tackle. And I thought of it because you mentioned Cléon, and that they could, give part of it for buses. If we are an OEM, when we changed again to a full electric plant, we didn't lose jobs, because we switched those who were losing their job on the traditional assembly line, we put them on a new battery assembly line. So we reskilled them, and we have grown. As an OEM, you can do that. I think as an OEM, it's fairly possible. It's investments, it's time, it's not cheap, but you can do it. You can transform your workforce so you don't lose them. If you look at the suppliers, the picture is much grimmer, let's be honest. I mean, if you're an SME and all your life you specialized in one piston for a combustion engine, and you're not going to miraculously do something for the e-motor. So that's really what we need to have on board. And if we want this transition to be just, we really need to find solutions for them. And it can be, retraining to move them to other industry. But then the problem, of course, is that if it's a region, in, I don't know, Germany, central Germany or South Portugal, and the next opportunity for batteries is in northern Sweden, you're probably not going to, move them around, and they're probably not going to be very happy. So that's going to be the main challenge. But we have 10 years. So that's why on our side we're saying, don't stop, don't slow down. But really this one needs to be tackled urgently if we want to have, because otherwise it's millions of people who will be very, very, very unhappy about electrification and will not be very good ambassadors, whereas we see that the ones switching rarely switch back to a combustion engine once you've started driving electric. But we don't want to have millions of people on the side feeling that they've been left out.
Is this all enough, Thomas? Do you think we can leave the room with these in mind and convince your colleagues? What's your view?
Maybe let's be clear. Here, there's a key role for the EPP to play. The European People's Party has been one of the two, if not the most important backbone of European democracy since the very beginning of the European Union. I'm very confident that if they choose to have a conversation with the other parts, the other political families, including my own, but also the Liberals, that have been, again, the central coalition for everything that we've achieved, that put Europe, from the ashes of World War II to where we are today, then I'm very confident, because I know that the pragmatic voices inside the EPP will win, and I'm confident actually the majority of the EPP members are pragmatic people. But if for some reason that are linked to party politics, and maybe someone who wants to get revenge, and therefore make an alliance with the far-right groups, then I'm worried. But I'm not only worried, I'm actually not worried specifically for car manufacturers, for the entire European Union project as a whole. Because that is an alliance that would be made with people that are against the European Union. Speaking of Viktor Orban, who I had the unpleasure to see in Parliament last week in Strasbourg. If you want to know if something is pro-Chinese or against China, just look at where Orban stands. He is against the electric car. even if as China has invested a lot in the electric car chip supply chain in Hungary. So that's one way to be certain that this is not specifically pro-China. I think maybe something that could be helpful is to remind us of the mistakes we made in the past. Like we Europeans, we are at our best where we remember the past mistakes and we learn from it. That's what the entire European Union is about, learning from past mistakes. In a, let's say, less dramatic reference than World War II, where were we in 2010? We were the global leader in solar panels. The best companies were European companies, a lot of them German. And there was a choice to not provide fair competition. There was a political choice done by the Council more than the Commission and the Parliament. The Commission was on the right side of history there to let the European PV industry fail. We lost more than 100,000 jobs in only 2 years in that sector. And now we are entirely dependent on supply from China. We should not repeat that mistake, especially in a sector that is far more important than just PV job-wise, which is the automotive industry. And so for that, we need to act. We need to have a comprehensive policy. We need demand-side measure. Some of that would be the social leasing scheme. Others would be, also the CO2 tariff regulation is a demand-side measure. We need support for the supply, especially for battery manufacturing, where we are struggling because of the Inflation Reduction Act that was adopted in the US, or rather, let me be accurate, because of the lack of EU response to the Inflation Reduction Act in the USA. We need to have an industrial policy to ensure also more solidarity between the different components of the supply chain. Not all car manufacturers are very nice with their suppliers, to say the least, and I know that from personal experience in my own family. And we need also to have trade measures that are there, and that's why I'm very happy to see that the Commission is willing to use its trade power to make sure that there is a fair competition. And when some people are telling me that, yeah, but if you put too much taxes on Chinese cars, then the Chinese are going to invest in Europe and produce those cars in Europe, I'm like, great. They have a lot of technological advance, and we know that also having their investment in Europe could be helpful if it's done smartly to have a European supply chain that is made of European companies, but also of Japanese, Korean, Chinese, US companies that once they settle in Europe can also play a positive role in making sure that we can make, to make the European car industry great again.
Thanks. I'm not going to open the Pandora's box of a discussion around China tariffs with 5 minutes to go in the conversation, but I do know, and I think it's a key conversation coming, is how to make that investment in Europe the right kind of investment for the supply chains, the technology transfer, and everything else. But to maybe take a step back and wrap things up, I think it's clear from this discussion is that we're at an almost existential moment for the future of this EV shift in Europe and the industry base that we have. We've defined a load of different challenges across the ecosystem, which we're all trying to tackle at once to build up this opportunity in the best way possible, from the infrastructure to the trucks, to the cars, to the shared mobility, which was mentioned too. And we're doing it in a difficult place because it's been clear we're running behind other parts of the world too, and we have to catch up. Clear across this panel is 2035 and the direction of travel is necessary and has to be kept for the investment certainty it brings and much more. Now the real question, I think, is how can we turn that into these actionable solutions for taking steps forward on demand and everything else? And so there's a lot of work for us to do ahead together with Thomas and his colleagues and everyone here in Brussels. What I'm going to do now is just ask our panelists for their last remarks. Very quick remarks on what's your priority ask that you take forward from this, that you really would like, if the Commission can deliver this one thing in the next years, that will make the most difference to these opportunities. And then we'll give Thomas the last word to see us all out. So, Céline, what's your one last closing remark here?
Just one. I have a long wish list. Then I would go for, apart from not moving the legislation, obviously, I would go for invest in key technologies that we need in Europe, the whole value chain.
Brilliant. Value chain. Bart.
A bit longer. I'm very happy that I sit here with Volvo and the trucks, with Volta trucks. Because in the end we are solving this chicken and egg problem of the OEMs and the charging companies. I'm also happy with Mylens here in the room. But for a solution, I think you really have to stimulate the OEMs and the consumers, the companies that buy the trucks, that buy the trucks. That's quite complicated. I think for the other parts, the charging company is not complicated. Just give out the tenders. It doesn't cost anything. It's just organization.
Carla.
We're committed, and we want to work as a united force with our competitors as well. You know, and this is where I see also a major opportunity in this industrial policy. There's enough market for all of us to flourish, and we should all collaborate to make sure that we build these healthy foundations of a future-proof supply chain. So again, we call ourselves now the Phoenix. You'll see trucks hopefully in Brussels soon. Make sure that you send us some photos.
So thank you to all from Lucy and ChargeUp and myself for joining us today. Thomas, I'll give you the last word. Are you encouraged? Have you given you material that you can use now as you go forward? Give us your key takeaways in the next 3 minutes, and then we'll let everyone go. Thank you.
Thanks. Three quick points. Sorry, but first, thanking you obviously for being here. I think this was a very nourishing conversation that we've been having. So I take the first point, which is protect the existing legislative framework. Obviously, that's what we need to do. Let's be clear, the best way to ensure that is that the Commission does nothing. So yeah, we are kind of in a situation where we are talking with the candidates who want to be Commissioner. We're like, on this tiny bit, can you do nothing like that? That would really be great. Which is, so something I did not expect to do as a parliamentarian. Second thing is the issue of investment. I think one of the very last pieces I wrote as a researcher was analyzing the impact of the Inflation Reduction Act on European competitiveness. And at the end, I said, we need to build kind of our response, and whatever you want to name it, but if you can name that a clean tech investment plan if you want, or a competitiveness fund for all I care. But to have the things that are really providing what the Inflation Reduction Act does, which is besides the quantity of funding that matters, the quality of the funding, the long-term perspective. Because I mean, economists know that, like the kind of stop-and-go policies are not ideal. And nonetheless, that's what has been done, with a lot being done during the COVID times, and that was great. That was kind of the go part of the policies, and then the stop that came in Germany in late 2023, but that is also coming in different countries in different ways, even if Germany was really the trigger point, I think, for the whole discussion we're having now, 1 year after the Bundesverfassungsgericht delivered its ruling cancelling 60 billion euros of German public spending, a lot of which, in the end, was taken away from electric cars. And my third and last point is more a call for you guys in the audience, also to play a role. It's much simpler for me as an MEP if, when I'm meeting my colleagues from other groups, that at least we can start our discussion based on a shared understanding, a shared diagnosis of what are the challenges. This is super helpful. And then we can do what politicians do. But what I find is that for a lot of people I'm working with inside Renew, inside the EPP, we have this. But for some others, I'm starting the conversation. I'm like, oh God, we need to zoom out, and we need to review stuff that I thought that I did take for granted actually before the conversation. And this can be helpful, especially going to the MEPs that have the same nationality as you or your company can also be helpful there, and showing that the technology is there, that there are political choices to be made, but at least if we can have in Parliament a shared understanding of the challenge, that would already be extremely helpful. So I'm going to leave you with my own motto as an MEP. It's words that are attributed to the Italian philosopher Antonio Gramsci, and it says that we need to be to articulate the pessimism of intelligence. And if we're intelligent, we can be somewhat pessimistic about the political situation where we are now. So we need to articulate the pessimism of intelligence with the optimism of the will. And I think that's what we need to do as Europeans. Here again, we Europeans, we managed to do a lot of great things. Peace in Europe, the euro, just to mention a few things that were done and that were, if you think about it in those times, you know, they were crazy ideas, but they made that happen with a lot of will and a lot of hard work. And I think we need to do the same for the electric cars, but more generally for making the entire European Green Deal a reality for Europeans.
Thank you, Thomas. Thanks, everyone in the audience. Thanks to our speakers. We have an inspirational quote to take away with us. Let's make this the start of a conversation, not the end of it. Thank you.